Trapp, and I'm interviewing my mom today, Laurie Trapp, on March 17th, 2013. So, we're going to start out interviewing with a few questions. And the first question is, what is your full name?
Laurie Ann Pullen Trapp.
And do you know why your parents selected this name for you?
Actually, I do. It's kind of a funny story. My mother watched soap operas, and there was a soap opera years ago called The Edge of Night. And one of the main characters, her name was Laurie Ann, and so I am named after a character on a soap opera.
And did you ever have a nickname from your name?
No.
Where and when were you born?
I was born November 3rd, 1959, in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Were there other family members in the area?
No, my parents actually lived in Hugo, Oklahoma, but I was born in Oklahoma City and was adopted about a month after I was born by my parents. Other relatives lived in Durant, which was about an hour away from Hugo, and then I had an aunt that lived out in Hobart, which is in western Oklahoma.
Do you remember what your house was like when you were little?
I do. It was a small 3-bedroom house, and when I was born, they added on a big den and eating area in the back so that there would be more room, because that would have given 4 of us in the house, because I also have an older brother.
So how many rooms was it?
It has 3 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and a big open concept area that had a dining room and a kitchen table and a den.
And how many bathrooms?
2.
Did it have electricity?
It did. We lived in town. We had all the modern conveniences.
So that means indoor plumbing.
Indoor plumbing, no outhouse.
Telephones?
We had telephones, but our telephones were black, and my parents rented them from AT&T, and they were attached to the wall.
Were there any special items in your house that you remember?
Were some antique items, and I have some of those that I liked now since my parents have passed away. One of them is the desk that we have in our living room that was my grandfather's. And the other item is another desk that I use as a desk that was my father's.
What was your earliest childhood memory?
I told you this one the other day. When we went to the 6th floor museum, I was 4 years old when President John Kennedy passed away. And I can remember sitting on the floor in front of my mother and watching what I thought was a parade, but it was actually his funeral. So that's really the earliest memory I have, is watching that.
Describe the personalities of your family members.
My father was a very gentle man, very easygoing, a Christian man. He taught Sunday school every Sunday, attended church, was a member of the Rotary Club. He was very civic-minded. My mother was stern, is a way to put that. She was strict, but that's okay. She was not hard or mean, but she had strict discipline. She expected what she expected, and when she told you to do something, you did it. You didn't wait for her to tell you again. And then my brother, he was kind of a free spirit. He was about 9.5 years older than I am, and once he graduated from high school, he kind of moved off and did his own thing.
What kind of games did you play growing up?
Oh, we made up games with my friends. We would play Cowboys and Indians. We rode bikes all over town. We made up things. Like, I can remember in the 4th grade, our teacher read us Dr. Dolittle. So during recess, we would go outside and we would act out what she read to us. I got to be Dr. Dolittle because I was the tallest one in the class. And I remember that my friend Donna Griggs, she was the parrot that sat on his shoulder, so she walked around with her hand on my shoulder all the time. But we made up our games.
Did you have a favorite toy?
No, not really.
What was your favorite thing to do for fun?
Well, with my friends, I had two really good friends that were opposite kind of each other. So my friend Debbie that lived across the street, she and I would play Barbies and we would ride our bicycles all over town. Because back when we were little, we didn't have a specific area that we had to stay in. We could actually ride anywhere we wanted, and our parents really didn't care. We had the bicycles with the banana seats, and in the back of the banana seat was a little bar, and Debbie's mother sewed, and she would sew clothes for our Barbies. And we had made little hangers. I don't know where we got them, but we had little hangers that we'd hang clothes up, and then we'd hang those clothes on the back of our bicycle seat so that when we were riding around, our Barbies were on trips and they would go places. And then my other friend, which was the totally opposite, was Pat McEwen. He lived behind me across the alley. And he and I would play Batman and do the tomboy things. And so I can remember one time we went into his house and we got a sheet and got up on the roof because we went up on his roof a lot for whatever reason. And took turns holding onto the corners, jumping off the roof, trying to use it like a parachute. He also had a thing called a bucking bull, which was a barrel that was attached with 4 big wires to a big frame, and you'd sit on this barrel and you'd have people pulling on the wires like to simulate a bucking bull, and we played on that thing for hours and hours.
Did you have many family chores?
No, not really. I did have to help keep my room clean and pick up after myself, but as far as washing dishes or taking out the trash and stuff, I really didn't have to do that very often.
Did you receive an allowance?
I did a little bit, and it would come and go. Sometimes I would get an allowance, sometimes I wouldn't. When I was in high school, I worked for my father, and that was kind of like my allowance. He paid me to do a little bit of work during the summers for him.
Did you save your money or did you spend it?
Oh, I saved it. I always saved it. And then if I needed money, I'd go up to my dad and I'd ask him for some, and I wouldn't use mine.
What was school like for you as a child?
I absolutely loved school. It was fun. My friends and I, we played school when we were little and took turns being the teacher and stuff. I can remember in the 4th grade, we had a teacher named Miss Cooksey, and she was very heavy and overweight, and she used to entertain us. She would take her paddle, and she'd get up in front of the class and pretend like it was a guitar and sing and dance for us. But we were all scared of Mrs. Cooksey because she did have that paddle. And so we were all very good in there. But school was fun. Went to elementary school, 1st through 6th grade, and then 7th and 8th grade in junior high. And then high school, I went 9th grade campus when I was in school was separate from the rest of the high school. So they had to bus the kids that were in band from the high school back over to the 9th grade campus for the school for the rest of the day.
What were your best and worst subjects?
I would say my best subject was math. I absolutely loved math, and I had really good math teachers, so much that when I went to college, that's what I started out was as a math major, but that changed. Worst subjects, probably English and writing, because I'm one of these people that can tell you everything you need to know in probably one sentence. I don't elaborate very well when I write.
Where did you attend grade school?
I went to school at Eugene Field, which is in Hugo, Oklahoma. It was a neighborhood school. I would walk to and from school. I would cut through to Pat McEwen's house and pick him up, and we would walk together and go to school. We had to walk over a little bridge that went over a drainage ditch, and of course, on the way home, we always went through the ditch, not over the little bridge. So it was a neighborhood school. The junior high was on the west side of town, and so my father took me to school in the mornings when I went to junior high. And after school in junior high, I either walked with a friend of mine to her house, which wasn't quite as far as mine, and then somebody would pick me up from there after school, or sometimes one parent would carpool and pick up some of us, and then another one. My parents took turns doing that too. I also remember in junior high, the school did not have a cafeteria for the junior high. So we got to eat off campus. And it was about a block from downtown, and we would walk downtown and eat at a little cafe almost every day. And across the street from the school was like a concession stand where you could buy chips and Cokes and stuff. Sometimes I got to do that, but it was more fun to go downtown and eat. And we'd go to the Busy Bee sometimes and eat lunch in junior high. That was really cool. We thought we were big.
And did you attend college?
I did. I went to Centenary College in Louisiana. That's in Shreveport. I had always dreamed of going to the University of Oklahoma, but when I got down to it and I thought, there are 500 people in my entire high school, and if I go to OU, I'm going to have 500 people in my freshman English class. And with English being one of my worst subjects, that just scared me to death. So I had a cousin that went to Centenary, and I went and visited, and I really liked it. It was small. It's a small Methodist school. Very personable, small ratio of teachers to students, and she convinced me that would be a great place to go. So I thought, well, I'll go there for a year or two and get some basics out of the way, and then I'll transfer to OU. Well, I never transferred. I made such great friends at Centenary that I just stayed there all 4 years, and I am still best of friends with 6 of these people still today. We keep in contact with by telephone and Facebook and emails, and occasionally we get together in the summers and go on trips together. So it was a great place.
Now, in high school or college, did you have any school activities, sports, did you participate in?
When I was in high school, they didn't have any girls' athletics until I was a sophomore. And they had a girls' track team. And so, of course, being sports-minded and athletic, I wanted to be on the track team. So, excuse me. So, I ran track. And because I was taller and not necessarily bigger, but stronger and bigger boned, the coach had me doing shot put and discus. And so I thought I wanted to try to do something else. I wasn't a very good runner, but since I was tall, she wanted me to try hurdles. So I was running hurdles and practicing on the football field one day, and it was a natural grass field. They didn't have turf. And so I landed in a hole, and I tore my ACL. And so that kind of ended my track career. And I ended up being manager for the track team into my sophomore year, and then for my junior and senior year. But that was the only girls' sport that they had when I was in high school. Now, they had a summer tennis league, and so I learned to play tennis, and I played in tennis tournaments and traveled to Paris and to Idabel and Durant and Antlers and played in tennis tournaments. And I had a good friend that we played doubles and played singles and stuff. And so that's some of the activities I did in high school as far as sports. one of the other things I'm proud about was I was selected by the American Legion to go to Girls State when I was in high school. And that was fun. Got to go to Oklahoma City and spend a week and learn about government and how things were and how laws were made, bills are done, and how Oklahoma government works. And because of that also, and some of the connections my parents had, I got to be a page in the Oklahoma House and also in the Oklahoma Senate. And that was really fun too.
Do you remember any fads from your youth? Like popular hairstyles or clothes?
No, it was back in the 70s. We had, maybe elephant bottom jeans, really big leg jeans. All of us had just long, straight hair, kind of like yours is. But as far as any real fads, I don't really remember just a whole lot.
Who were your childhood memories?
Oh, friends, of course. One friend that I always think about, she lived out in the country. Her name was Carmen Armstrong. And I absolutely loved going to her house because she lived in the country. And she absolutely loved coming into town because I lived in town. But when we would go out to her house, we would ride horses and we would play in the hay barn and we would take the bales of hay, and those were just the little square bales of hay then. They didn't have the big round bales like you see now in the pastures. And we would take the hay bales and we would make a fort and tunnels and structures in the barn, and it's a wonder that we never got bit by rats that were out in the barn, or that the bales never collapsed in on us, or we never got seriously hurt or anything. They also had a Shetland pony. It was one of the meanest Shetland ponies and horses there ever was, and we probably didn't help it any because we would put it in the cattle chute in the arena and get on it and open the gates, and it'd come out bucking, and we were having a rodeo, and we would ride White Man, what was the horse's name, and have bucking bulls. But we would ride through the pastures and do that. I also had friends that went water skiing, and so that's how I learned to water ski. And because I was a good swimmer, the guy that took us skiing, he had kids that were my age, but he taught me how to drive the boat and pull the skiers and load the boat on and off the trailer so that when he backed the boat down, I could load the boat on and off the trailer. He didn't trust his own kids. He trusted me before he did his own kids, so that was kind of neat.
And any childhood heroes?
Always a sports hero. You know, Johnny Bench for the Cincinnati Reds was probably one of my favorite people. His number was 5. If you ask me what my favorite number is, I'll tell you it's 5, and that's because of Johnny Bench. He played catcher, and I always thought that was the neatest thing. And one of the other reasons I like him is because he is from Oklahoma, and so am I. Of course, I was a big Dallas Cowboy fan. That was back when they were the real Cowboys. You know, that's when they used to win. So, you know, Roger Staubach was one of my favorites. Those two come to mind.
What was your favorite songs or music?
Oh, as I was a child, I listened to David Cassidy and to Bobby Sherman. Those were the biggies when I was probably a teenager. Now, as I got older and heard some of my brother's music, he listened to like the Beatles, and I got into kind of liking the Beatles by the time I was in high school and in college. I didn't get to listen to a lot of music. My mother had a cabinet stereo, and so I did have some records that I could listen on that, but my mother did not like my music, so I didn't get to listen to it very often, and I didn't ever have my own stereo until after I was graduated from college and could afford to buy it myself.
Did you have any pets?
I did. We had a dog named Tippy. He was part wire hair terrier and part just mutt. He was given to us by a cousin of ours, and of course he loved my mother better than he did anybody else, but I think that's because she fed him. But he would go outside and he would play with us, and he would sleep in the house, and Tippy was the only dog that I ever had growing up.
What history world events had the most impact on you while you were growing up?
I remember Vietnam, but I don't know that it had a huge impact on me because there was nobody that I really knew that was in Vietnam. I'm sure there were people that my parents knew, but I do remember that being on the news and that being a very important thing. I also can remember back when Nixon was president and the Watergate scandal. I can remember watching that.
So none of them really personally affected your family?
No, not really, no.
How is the world today different from what it was like when you were a child?
The world is very, very fast-paced now. Back when I was a child, it was much slower, much calmer. Where you were involved with Girl Scouts and sports and maybe this club or that club and this at church and that at church. I grew up in a very small church, and so we didn't have lots of things. Didn't have the soccer leagues. Like I said, all I did, was play tennis a little bit, and that really wasn't until I was in high school. We had a much slower paced life. Things were calmer. They were more family oriented, probably. We did more things together as a family, like vacations. We went to Durant where my parents, my grandparents lived, both sets of them, and so we did that a lot, probably at least a couple times a month, if not more often than that. I would go to Durant with my mom, or my mom and dad both sometimes.
What is one thing you most want people to remember about you?
Oh, I don't know. I'd like to think people maybe think I'm funny, honest, I don't know.
What was your religion growing up?
We belonged to the First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and that's the same church that I was married in. And as I went to college, it was a Methodist school, so I started going to a Methodist church when I was in college just because it was associated with the school. And I'm now a Methodist and belong to a Methodist church here in Paris.
Were you ever mentioned in a newspaper?
All the time. That's really kind of funny. Because I was a big sports fan, and my daddy was too, they had football contests during football season in the paper where you would have like 10 or 15 college and pro football games, and you would pick the winner. And so you would have a score sheet or a sheet that you would fill out, an entry form, and you'd fill that out and turn it into the newspaper office. And the person that got the most right would win like $20 for that week. And so my dad and I would pick who the winners were every week and turn them in. And I won at least 2 or 3 times throughout the seasons. And so they would always have your picture in the paper and do that.
Describe a typical family dinner.
My mother was a stay-at-home mother, and she cooked a big meal at lunch. So where we eat our big meal at dinner, because I worked and your father worked and nobody was at home to cook a big lunch, we have a big meal at dinner. And our big meal growing up was at lunch because my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my father would come home for lunch, and we would have a big meal there. We would sit down at the table and have lunch. It would be usually, some meat, some potato, some other vegetable. Um, I always drank milk, and Mother and Dad had water. But in the summer, Mother would fix iced tea. But that was usually only in the summer when it was hot. Uh, my high school also did not have a cafeteria like the junior high didn't, so we had to eat off campus. So I had a friend that lived a couple blocks from the high school, and her mother would cook for us one week, and we would go to her house and eat and watch all my children while we ate. And then the next week, we would go to my house, and my mother would cook for us, and we ate at my house the next week and watched all my children there, and then went back to school. We had like an hour to go eat lunch. It was really kind of nice.
And did you have favorite foods?
I did. I loved roast beef, and I loved my mom's spaghetti. It wasn't like regular spaghetti with the long noodles. It was kind of like spaghetti that was cut up, and she fixed it in a skillet. It was more like a casserole kind of type thing. And she made a chocolate cake that was really good that I liked.
How were the holidays? Birthday, Christmases, etc.?
Birthdays, Mother always let me have a big birthday party. And so we didn't, you didn't rent places like, the skating rink and stuff like that, because there weren't any places like that in Hugo to rent. My birthday was 3 days after Halloween, and I always wanted a Halloween party, but Mother never would let me because it was after Halloween. But a couple that I remember was we had a scavenger hunt one time where she had us going around the neighborhood in groups, asking people, door to door for different items, and we came back and see who had the most items and stuff. And then one time we had a dress-up party where only girls were invited, and we dressed up in our mother's clothes with hats and fur coats, and we brought our baby dolls, and so we had like a big tea party. But we had birthdays like that. What else was it? Christmases. We spent Christmas in Durant. Always went to Durant for Christmas. As I got a little bit older, we would have Christmas morning when Santa Claus came at home, and then we would pack up the car and drive to Durant and spend the rest of the holidays over there. And then Thanksgiving, we always went out to western Oklahoma, to Hobart, where my aunt and uncle lived. And I always loved doing that. We would leave Hugo a couple days before Thanksgiving and drive to Durant, pick up my grandparents and my aunt that lived there, and then go on to Hobart. And the reason I liked being out in Hobart was because out in western Oklahoma, it was a lot colder at Thanksgiving than it was in southeastern Oklahoma, and there was always a chance that it might snow because it never snowed in Hugo. And so occasionally we got to see snow, and I thought that was really cool because I always liked seeing snow.
So no special traditions, really?
No, not really. My grandmother always cooked, Christmas dinner, and the adults sat at one table, the kids sat at the other, and I was the youngest of all the grandchildren, so I was always treated really well by all the adults. I was the baby.
Who was the oldest relative you remember as a child? What do you remember about them?
That would probably be my mother's parents, Boyd and Daisy Abbott. I can remember my grandfather, he took all the grandkids when they got to be a certain age downtown Durant to a shoe store and bought them their first pair of cowboy boots. He thought that was the best thing. And so I can remember going down and picking out a pair of cowboy boots for Granddad to buy us. My grandmother was a wonderful cook. She cooked all the time. My mother didn't particularly like cooking. She thought it was more important to be out with the boys and dating than it was to learn to cook. So she always told the story that it was funny that she could slice tomatoes, and that was about it. But grandmother always cooked, and she had flower beds that she tended to, and worked in her garden. And she always wore an apron. I can remember she was a little short woman, so I was probably taller than my grandmother by the 5th grade. But I always loved going there.
Are there any stories about famous or infamous relatives in your family?
I have a big political background on both sides of my family. I'll start with my mom's side of the family. My great grandfather, his name was Lynn Boyd, and he was from Kentucky. He was Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives back in the 1850s. I believe he served two presidential terms, and I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look it up on the computer, the exact years and who the presidents were at that time. But he was from Kentucky, and his name evolved down where my grandfather's name was Lynn Boyd Abbott. And so his name came from Lynn Boyd, who was Speaker of the House. I don't know if you remember when we went to Washington, D.C., and we were touring the Capitol, and I asked the aide that was taking us around on the tour, I believe it was Kay Bailey Hutchison's aide that was taking us on the tour. I asked them if they could take us down the hall that goes to the Speaker's office. It's not a public area, and he took us down there because I wanted to show you and Andy the picture of Lynn Boyd that's on that hallway, and because he would be your relative too. So that's on my mom's side of the family. On my father's side of the family, my father had first cousins by the last name of Edmondson. There were 2 brothers. One was Howard and one was Ed. Ed served Oklahoma in the U.S. House of Representatives for 20 years from the Muskogee area. And so he was in Washington, D.C. for, like I said, for 20 years. And when I remember as a child going to Washington, D.C., we got to, of course, tour the White House and tour the Capitol, and that's how I knew that the picture was in that hallway from that. And I can remember we were there at some point, and we got to go eat in the representatives' dining room, which is really cool because that's not a common place where most people get to go. When I was up in Hugo at my mother's house earlier and was working on cleaning out some things, I found the passes that were given to us when we toured the Capitol for the Senate, to get into the Senate chamber and to the House chamber. So that was really cool. I need to get those and have those framed. Howard Edmondson, Ed's brother, was governor of Oklahoma. He was the youngest governor ever to be governor of Oklahoma, and still, I believe, holds that record today. He was 35 when he was elected governor and stayed governor until there was a senator that either passed away or resigned from Oklahoma, and so Howard resigned as governor, and the lieutenant governor then became governor of Oklahoma and appointed Howard senator. So little politicking going on there and stuff. But the neat thing about Howard is he was elected governor in 1958 and took office in January of 1959. And I was born in 1959. My parents had adopted a son 9.5 years earlier than that, and they decided that if they needed someone else to have, they wanted another child, they were going to have to adopt another child. So since my father's cousin was governor, they went to the governor and they said, we'd like to adopt a child, and within a week they had me. And so I was kind of a political baby. I think that's kind of cool.
What was the full name of your spouse?
Robert Lee Trapp.
Did he have any siblings?
He did. He had two brothers, Johnny and Larry.
And his parents?
His parents were Glenna and Elmer, or Elmo as he went by, Trapp, and they lived here in Paris.
When and how did you meet your spouse?
Well, that's kind of a funny story, too. We met on a blind date. A lady that I worked with set us up on a blind date. She knew Robert since he was a little boy, and she thought we'd be a good match. So he called a couple times, and we talked on the phone, and we decided to go out. And so I was at my apartment, and the doorbell rings, and I look through the little peephole, and there stands my mother and father. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not going to answer the door. And maybe they'll just go away. And about that time, this pickup drives up, and out gets this guy that has real bushy, curly hair and a big scraggly beard, and just doesn't look real well kept. And he comes up to the door, and I've never seen him before. I had no idea what he looked like. And I open the door when he rings the doorbell, and I'm like, hi, are you Robert? I'm Laurie. Meet my parents. And it's a wonder he ever came back.
What did you do on your dates?
We went out to eat. We just rode around some. We would go out to the lake and go. He had a boat, and we would go water skiing and swimming out at the lake. We'd go to the movies.
When and where did you get married?
We were married August 8th, 1987. I tried to get him to wait another year so it would be 8/8/88, but he didn't want to, and I really didn't either. But we got married in Hugo, Oklahoma, in the church that I grew up in.
What memory stands out the most from your wedding day?
That would be my maid of honor. There's actually two memories. She had some pantyhose, and for some reason they ended up in Robert's pocket. And so when we were at the reception, he hollers at her across the room, "Hey, Frazier, here's your pantyhose," and throws them to her. And she was just like really embarrassed. The other memory I have was, because it was in August, it was really, really hot, and the church is a very small church, and so my mother was afraid that if they didn't turn off the air conditioners, that nobody could hear during the service. So when the service started, she had the air conditioners turned off, which was kind of a dumb thing, but my mother was going to do what my mother wanted to do because she was very strong-willed. And it was so hot, and Robert he sweated very easily, and it was very hot, and he had on a tux with a vest and everything. And that was back when Saturday Night Live had first kind of started and was very popular, and there was a character on Saturday Night Live called Rosanna Dana. And Rosanna Dana would have a sweat ball that would go to the end of her nose, and it would just sit there. And she was like, Rosanna Dana, get that sweat ball off the tip of your nose. And Robert was sweating really bad, and we're standing there looking at each other while someone is singing the Lord's Prayer, and that is the longest song in history. Do not ever have that at your wedding, please. and it's just going on and on forever, it seems like. And your father had a sweat ball on the tip of his nose, and that's all I could think about. And I would tell him to shake his head, and he'd shake his head, and the sweat would fly off, and another one would come right back. So that's kind of the joke during the middle of the wedding.
What do you believe is the key to a successful marriage?
Honesty. You need to be honest with each other. Don't hide things, especially about money. You need to be open. You need to be able to communicate very well with each other, talk about things, good or bad.
What is one of the most valuable things you learned from your parents?
Morals and scruples. Right from wrong. Mm-hmm. And part of that is being honest also. I knew that if I did something wrong and I was asked about it, that I told. And I knew I would get in trouble, but I knew it wouldn't be as bad as if I didn't tell and my mom or dad found out, and then I would really be in trouble and be a whole lot worse. But honesty is always the best policy. I guess that's why it's a little slogan. But my parents taught me right from wrong. They raised me in a Christian home. I still have kind of a guilty conscience when I do something that's not right, even when there's nobody there to say, hey, you really shouldn't be doing that. It sticks in the back of my head.
What accomplishments were you the most proud of?
I was proud of graduating from college. Centenary was a very hard school. Coming from Hugo High School, I never studied. I graduated 5th in my class in Hugo, and I went off to college thinking, man, if I just read the chapter in the textbook, I'm studying. Well, that wasn't the case, and I didn't do very well my first year, so I had to really learn how to study and buckle down. And I went from a very, very low GPA to a pretty good GPA and graduated. Not with honors or anything, but very decent GPA. And then I went on to work on my master's, and so I have my master's degree in physical education. And I'm proud that I have taught for 31 years. It's all been for the same school district. There's a sense of pride about that. There's a lot of people that change jobs and just bounce from place to place, and I like that I've built up a reputation at one place of business, because a school is a place of business, and that I'm known for being a solid teacher.
Alrighty, well, thank you for letting me interview you today.
You're welcome. Thank you.